Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. I'm going to talk to you today about something going on with the very famous singer Shakira, who could face 8 years in prison. Actually, they're saying 8 years and 2 months, and a $24 million fine if she is convicted in a tax fraud case. Now, I've had some people ask over the years about consequences of, breaking the tax rules, etc. And so today we're going to discuss tax fraud, how it applies to Shakira, what's going on here, and then how that might apply to you and where you need to be careful, what you need to know. So let's dive in. Before we do, if you haven't already, please smash the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for watching the videos. If you like them, if you'd like help with optimizing your global tax, relocating abroad, figuring out the best places to go, generally living and doing business internationally, we can help you figure out the best solution for you as well as implement that solution. Please reach out to us. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message to our website, offshorecitizen.net. Okay. Now, so what's going on? So between 2012 and 2014, Shakira was in a relationship with somebody from the Barcelona Football Club, and she was living in Barcelona. Now, she ended up spending over 183 days, so over half the year, in the country, and her kids were going to school there, and there was all kinds of different stuff. That was basically her center of life. At the time, she claimed to have residency, and I believe it was Bahamas. However, she never actually visited there in spite of having a home there. And so she ended up being investigated by the Spanish tax authorities. They said she owed unpaid taxes, I believe it was 14 million, which she says she has now paid, plus the 3 million euros in interest on that. However, they are still going after her for tax fraud. They are asking for penalties of 8 years and I think it's 2 months, plus a 24 million euro fine. So pretty hefty. And we've seen some other cases like this. Dolce & Gabbana famously ended up going to prison in Italy over tax evasion. And so, this could happen to a bunch of people. Now, in order to understand what's going on here, it's worth understanding that tax fraud is not merely a situation where you're doing a simple omission. Okay, so it's not like, hey, I made a mistake on my tax forms. Granted, there's a bunch of penalties and things in Spain for having such errors and omissions, etc. And that can certainly happen in a bunch of cases, but tax fraud has to be basically willful attempts to not pay tax. And it has to be, of course, illegal attempts. So we're not talking about, legally doing something, legal tax planning. We're talking about, for example, failing to file a return, actually not paying, deliberately falsifying a return and filing something that's not accurate, any of those types of things, as well as various different other schemes that would deliberately hide legitimate taxes owed, could be considered tax fraud. And so obviously this is a great example of where the penalties can be pretty serious. Now, it varies from country to country. In some countries this is not so serious. For example, it's practically a national sport, they'll say, in Switzerland, because it's not criminal. You have in UK, 5-year prison sentences can be possible. The IRS can do larger prison sentences, etc. There's lots of fines that are possible, etc., etc., etc. So now this is on top of the normal penalties for like late filing and interest for unpaid taxes and all that other stuff that can come up. So not good. Now, quickly, in the case of Shakira, she was deliberately stating that she wasn't resident in Spain, even though she was resident in Spain. It's kind of funny. Her publicists were saying, she's always followed all the rules and abided properly. Publicity is such a ridiculous thing to claim something that the facts are obviously not for. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. And she actually went to, if you read the case and find out what had happened, I think I commented on this a few years ago when it kind of originally came out. It was a situation where she'd actually gone to quite extensive lengths to not tie herself there. And the Spanish tax authority went to a lot of effort to prove that she was in the country over 183 days, which is kind of interesting because the rules in Spain technically do not require that you are physically in the country 183 days in order to be tax resident. But they put a lot of effort into proving that, as sort of this conclusive factor. In theory, just having it as your center of life could have made you tax resident there, but they weren't sufficiently going after that. They did a pretty extensive investigation, and there were things like looking at receipts from her assistant and on and on and on. So very, very detailed. And obviously, normal people are not going to warrant the attention or resources to go after them to the same extent. But this is also a really interesting example of how Spain, although they are a somewhat disorganized tax authority and therefore not very on top of all the people who are there, etc., if they get their claws into you, are extremely aggressive, right? So that's something to be aware of. So let's just talk about this as it might apply to you. So this is one of the reasons why it is worth doing proper legal tax planning, because in a lot of these cases, you could set yourself up to optimize your tax regardless of whether you're in one of these countries, especially if you're at the scale that Shakira is. I mean, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. Like, you can afford to pay quite a lot for really complex structuring and still get an ROI off it, and probably would have saved her a good portion of the 17 million plus all this mess that she's in now. It is worth understanding that normally what will happen when you have something to do with taxes is you'll just get things like late penalties, maybe some fines, some fees, this sort of thing, interest, etc. And that's when it's kind of a civil matter. So in most countries, what happens is you have essentially, if you are not paying your taxes, etc., it starts as a civil matter, then it can become a criminal matter. And that's when it becomes an issue with respect to jail time, etc. Now, usually, they're not really concerned about jail time. That's not really their objective. Their objective is to get paid. There's certain cases where they really want to basically drive a lesson home and create a precedent, and I suspect that's a little bit of what's happening in this case. There has been some situations kind of around the world with celebrities where it's kind of been like they want to demonstrate that they're not showing favoritism, quite the opposite, and they'll go pretty heavy-handed on celebrities, which is, just part of being a celebrity, I guess. And so, it is what it is. Now, it's within their power to go and ask for sentences such as this, but realistically, it's pretty rare. Most of the time, they're willing to accept taxes being paid, penalties, fines, late fees, etc., which can stack up to a lot. That could add up to a considerable amount. Depending on where you are, it could add up to much more than the tax owing. But that being said, it's probably better than spending a bunch of time in prison. Although I guess there's a few people who have gone to prison saying they would rather go to prison than to pay it. So it goes either way. Anyway, bottom line, you don't want to get involved in tax fraud at all. Very bad thing to be involved in. Definitely worth spending the effort, the time, energy, money, resources, etc., to properly plan and make sure that you're compliant accordingly. Granted, there's lots of ways that you can optimize around what's going on, and you should always be very, very careful to make sure you don't end up in a situation like this, because frankly, it's just not worth it. Let's just say she actually went to prison. Now, realistically, she probably won't go to prison. If she does go to prison, it probably won't be for as long as they say. They would have actually previously already offered her a deal, which she turned it down, and she decided she wanted to go to court instead. And then, even if she was to go to prison, she'd probably get out early on good behavior and, things like this. But that being said, how many years of your life is it worth? It's just, it's a pretty awful thing to have happen to you across the board, not just in terms of years of life kind of taken away and freedoms. Also, then you have a criminal record, and that's going to cause problems with other things internationally, etc. So definitely not worth it. Anyway, I hope that kind of fills you in a little bit. It will be interesting to see what happens with the case. It, I guess, will take place over the next little while, and we will see. I expect that if she is willing to go to trial like this and push accordingly, her lawyers probably have some sort of a reasonable defense built around. Probably she'll demonstrate that although she was negligent in paying her taxes, obviously, for many years, that it wasn't done deliberately or willfully trying to defraud them. Maybe she was relying on some sort of advice that she got from someone who was advising her inaccurately, or she didn't keep track of how long she was in the country. Who knows what argument they'll make, right? But they'll probably make some sort of argument to try and protect against that, and we will see where it goes. So anyway, if you have questions, comments, tell me what you guys think is going to happen with the trial, what the results will be. Put them in the comments below, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.